Thank you all for joining us today. As Matthew said, my name is Carmarion D, Anderson-Harvey. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I do serve as the Alabama State Director for the Human Rights Campaign. Alongside me is, during today's press call, will be Cathryn Oakley. She's Human Rights Campaign State Legislative Director and Senior Counsel. Representative Neil Rafferty, who serves as House District 54 in the Alabama State Legislature. Dr. Morissa Ladinsky, UAB Pediatric. She's the Gender Team Co-Lead Physician. Jeff Walker, who is an amazing father to an amazing transgender youth in Alabama. Reverend Julie Conrady, who is the minister of the Unitarian Universal Church of Birmingham. And Shannon Minter, who is with the National Center for Lesbian Rights, legal director. We're here today because in the final hour of the legislative session, as you most are aware, Alabama anti-LGBTQ plus elected officials decided to use precious momentary minutes to rush legislative attacks on our most vulnerable transgender youth and pass not one, but yesterday, 2 discriminatory and dangerous bills. We are here today to demand Governor Ivey to veto these harmful legislation immediately. For months, the people that are here and that are absent have had to sit through hearings after hearings and listen at our anti-LGBTQ plus elected officials attack them, their families, our transgender youth, and our communities. Make no mistake about it, by signing Senate Bill 184 and House Bill 322, Governor Ivey and the legislators in the State House are liable for the harm they cause to transgender people well-being caused by being subject to repeated legislative attacks on their dignity and humanity. Denying the necessary care needed and the ability to use a proper bathroom is wrong. These vulnerable children are being attacked by our anti-LGBTQ plus elected officials to score political points. Already, more than 2,500 parents from all 50 U.S. states and Washington, D.C. issued an open letter organized by the Human Rights Campaign condemning the length of anti-transgender legislation that we have seen moving in legislations across the country. Hundreds of businesses like Apple and Amazon are among those here in Alabama that have signed a letter opposing legislation like this. Those businesses and the people gathered here today know these bills do not fulfill the proposed goals of making our state safer. In fact, they do the exact opposite. They align Alabama with states like Texas and Florida in attacking transgender kids and worsening their emotional distress, which in addition to harming transgender youth and their families, drives businesses, tourism, and Alabamians out of the state altogether. Those gathered here today will share more of the personal impact these bills have on their lives and the lives of the well-being of our Alabamian youth. We will leave time at the end of the press to ask questions after the roundtable discussion we're having today. I'm now going to turn it over to my colleague, Cathryn Oakley, to introduce themselves.
Hello, my name is Cathryn Oakley. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the State Legislative Director and Senior Counsel at the Human Rights Campaign. Yesterday, in one breathtakingly cruel and cowardly day, the Alabama legislature passed the single most anti-transgender legislative package in history. Borrowing and combining discriminatory ideas from some of the states most notorious for anti-transgender discrimination, including Texas, Florida, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas, on the final day of legislative session, Alabama passed a package that amounts to a greatest hits of anti-transgender legislation. It includes a prohibition on transgender youth using school restrooms consistent with their gender identity, as did Tennessee last year and as did North Carolina's infamous HB2. a provision forcing educators to out LGBTQ youth against their will, a Florida-like don't say gay or trans provision amended at the last minute that forbids teachers from acknowledging the existence of LGBTQ people in grades K through 5, and historically, the first ever legislation imposing criminal penalties on providers of age-appropriate, medically necessary, gender-affirming care for transgender youth. Note that Arkansas's 2021 law, which was enjoined in federal court, did not carry criminal penalties. Note that Texas governor's executive action earlier this year, which was also enjoined in federal court, in state court, was not legislation. There is no way to look at the package passed by the Alabama legislature yesterday and fail to notice that these are not serious policy proposals. Between the 4 different pieces I mentioned, there isn't one that is addressing an actual problem. Rather, they are all, every one of them, motivated by fear, misunderstanding, and moral disapproval of transgender people, particularly transgender youth. That is, they're motivated by discrimination. Unfortunately, Alabama is one of 32 states this year to have introduced more than 140 pieces of legislation that specifically target transgender people, nearly all of those bills specifically targeting transgender youth. The last 3 years have been relentless, with historic levels of anti-transgender legislation introduced. In 2020, 79 anti-transgender bills were filed, a then record. In 2021, that number leaped to 150. This year, we are on pace to exceed that record, with particular emphasis on bills preventing transgender youth from playing sports, preventing transgender youth from accessing age-appropriate, medically necessary, gender-affirming care, and bills preventing transgender youth from using the restroom consistent with their gender identity. We've also seen a proliferation of legislation copying the Don't Say Gay or Trans legislation that recently passed in Florida, with at least 16 bills introduced so far in 10 states. These attacks on transgender youth are cruel, unnecessary, and wholly political. They cater to the radical right fringe of Republican primary voters, and that political grandstanding comes with real costs. It comes with real costs to transgender youth. It comes with real costs to taxpayers who are forced to defend these discriminatory laws in the courts. And it will come at a real political cost to politicians like Governor DeSantis, Governor Abbott, and yes, Governor Ivey, whose craven, shameful motivations for advancing this harmful legislation are finally coming to light. Americans do not support anti-LGBTQ discrimination and will reject this rhetoric at the ballot box. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce you to a powerful advocate for transgender youth in Alabama, Dr. Ladinsky. Dr. Ladinsky, over to you.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. I'm Morissa Ladinsky. I use she, her pronouns. I am a faculty attending pediatrician here within UAB, the Department of Pediatrics, University of Alabama at Birmingham. And I co-lead proudly our multidisciplinary gender care team. This team is one of about 45 within the United States and Canada in pediatric academic centers all over the country, where we on a subspecialty level integrate all of the providers that are needed to enhance the standard of care, evidence-based medicine that's been a part of our profession since 2006. Yesterday in Alabama was a day that we all dreaded, we all expected it, we feared it. And I think most of us are still numb with disbelief that we're actually walking in it. Alabama has a stained history of interlacing legislative disdain with folks that lawmakers see outside their lenses of lived experience. Yet Alabamians are absolutely better than this. This state is my home. I've adopted it, and it adopted me, and I'm not leaving it. And nor should the 500 youth whose amazing lives we've touched in the last 6 years since we've been here. The state continues to be home to thousands of brilliant, creative, gender diverse youth and their families. People who were never bothering anybody until all of us were thrust into the center of a national wave of political wedge legislation. Vilifying youth this time who can't fight back at a ballot box, that is not just bullying, it's frankly pedantic. My youth and their families, those gender diverse youth who I already know, but most importantly, those I haven't met yet, know that terrible laws do not endure. Should Governor Ivey sign this horrific piece of legislation into law, you let us do the heavy lifting to see it overturned. I need all of you to stay strong, to keep being you, and to know that we've got huge arms around you. I'm sad that in this current administration, when the Departments of Health and Human Services and Justice have stated, hey, states, this wedge bill is in violation of a number of federal statutes, and we are going to sanction you to the limits that the federal government allows. I'm scared, I'm sad, and I'm embarrassed that my state may about to become the litmus test for what could happen with standard of care medicine and my amazing patients caught in the center. So let's stay strong, let's work together and continue being the change that needs to happen. And with that, it gives me a great amount of pleasure and honor to introduce Jeff Walker. Jeff is one of a large number of our amazing patients. His daughter isn't just an amazing young lady, but is a leader in her own right at nearly 15 years old. Happy birthday to her also. All right, Jeff, take it away.
Hey, thank you. My name is Jeff Walker. I am he, him, his, and I am the proud father of Harley Walker, who couldn't be here with us this morning because she's in 9th grade and is required to go to school. I will say yesterday, from my perspective, what I witnessed with the last minute bring of these bills to the floor for vote, I watched just in shock and disbelief and continued disbelief of the falsehoods that were being spoken in these bills. And during the debates, things that were being mentioned as though they were true and happening here in Alabama. And as we've worked with Dr. Ladinsky and we've worked with the gender clinic there in Birmingham, I can tell you with utmost certainty, those are untruths. These things do not happen. And the way that this care is represented in these laws is absolutely false. I was shocked at the cowardice that was being presented in the House and Senate with these different laws. I was encouraged by Representative Rafferty and his standing up to the bullies yesterday. Sir, you have my utmost respect and I appreciate you, but I hated to see the way I understand the political process, but the way it was manipulated yesterday to force these very quick votes and to stop the debates that were ongoing in both the House and Senate, both yesterday morning and yesterday evening. And I'll stop there because I do have something from Harley she wanted to share. So Harley's statement to all of you: when I got home from school today, my parents both told me there's bad news. Both pieces of legislation that were pending here in Alabama had passed. First, I was shocked because I really thought the health care bill would not pass. She had so many instant thoughts. Am I going to have to move? What will this mean to me? What does this mean with my ability to go to the bathroom? How will I continue to get the care I've been getting for almost 5 years? After a few minutes, we pulled up the House debate of the Senate bill to talk about the amendment. I was so frustrated listening to the comments that were being made and the way trans people were being dehumanized. The uneducated way that trans people were being discussed made me so upset. last night as she went to bed, my daughter shared with me that she worries about the future and the future of our family in this state and what it's going to mean for her friends that are trans, and for our family, and whether or not we'll be able to continue to stay together as we have to pursue care for her and while our other kids have to maintain their lives here in the state of Alabama. Y'all, please, I'm sorry. I appreciate your time this afternoon, and I thank you all so much for your support.
Jeff, thank you so much for sharing from your heart about what your family is going through right now. I'm Reverend Julie Conrady, the settled minister of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Birmingham. My pronouns are she or my name. Trans issues are faith issues. We have trans persons, adults, children, and youth already in our faith communities, already hurt and in pain over this legislation. Like you heard from Jeff, I had parents in my congregation who called me last night in tears. They just want their children to be alive and safe. And this legislation puts both of those things at great risk. In many faith communities in my area, trans folks are welcomed fully and unequivocally into our faith communities. We support parents of trans youth, and we will continue to do so, as we all know that supportive communities surrounding youth going through any difficult time is life-saving and life-preserving. Faith communities invoke the spirit of life in all of us by affirming the inherent worth and dignity of all people. My church, as well as many other churches in Alabama, will continue to be a safe place for people who are exploring or affirming a gender identity different from the one assigned to them at birth. No legislation will change our beliefs in the beauty and worth of trans folks, nor those of other affirming houses of worship. And we will continue to speak out against bills that allow government oversight in how we peacefully live and identify. We will also continue to educate our congregations and children on issues related to gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation, as education does not provide more choices, but rather comprehensive sex education names and affirms what individuals already know to be true within themselves. Our national sex education curriculum is science-based and empowers youth to make healthy and safe sexual decisions, and delays unsafe sexual behavior by providing youth with the tools they need to make responsible decisions. Our curriculum affirms that there are many different types of gender identity and gender expression, and that the only people who should be involved in issues of gender identity and expression are those of the individual and their doctor, and in the case of youth, supportive parents. I hope Governor Ivey will be inspired by Utah Republican Governor Spencer Cox and his recent veto, where he said about trans youth, "Rarely has so much fear and anger been directed at so few. I don't understand what they are going through or why they feel the way they do, but I want them to live." Governor Ivey, we want our trans youth to live, and this legislation puts that at risk. Please, for those of you hearing this, contact Governor Ivey and encourage her to affirm that all of Alabama's children deserve to be loved for who they are and who they will become. You, trans youth of Alabama, you are Alabama's future, and we all want you to be a part of it. I now invite Shannon Minter to speak.
Thanks, everyone. It's such an honor to be here with Mr. Walker and Dr. Ladinsky and Reverend Conrady and others. I'm Shannon Minter, you see him pronouns. I'm the legal director of the National Center for Lesbian Rights. I want to address the medical care ban. So I'm here on behalf of NCLR, HRC, Southern Poverty Law Center, and LGBTQ advocates and defenders to make very clear that if this dangerous bill is signed into law, we will file a federal court challenge seeking an immediate injunction to protect children and families from the severe harms that any enforcement of this law will cause. In 30 years of working on behalf of LGBTQ people and families, this is the most harmful legislation I have ever seen proposed, much less enacted. When parents want what is best for their children, they are by far in the best position to understand and meet their own children's needs. This law seeks to displace those loving parents with the strong arm of the state. We have just not seen this before. Never before in the entire history of our country has a state government tried to literally criminalize parents or doctors for providing children with beneficial, necessary, well-established medical care. That's not only wrong, it is unlawful. If Alabama does the unthinkable, puts this law into effect, we will challenge it. We will have the full support of the United States Department of Justice, and I'm confident that it will be enjoined. And we wanted to open things up now, I think, for some Q&A.
Oh, actually, I think we have one more speaker, Neil Rafferty.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to all the guests and to all the speakers. Thank you to HRC, Center for Lesbian Rights. And just thank you to everyone who's here today. Yesterday, we saw an assault on our communities. We saw an assault on freedom. We saw an assault on choice. We saw an assault on children and their families. It's a shameful day here in Alabama, because we should and we do deserve better. And that's why we need to stand up, make sure they know they will not erase us, make sure that they know that we're not going anywhere, make sure they know that this is our home too. It is time. No one can just sit back anymore. No one can be silent anymore. It is now incumbent upon every single one of us who care, every single one of us who has a single doubt in our head, every single one of us who has an ounce, an iota of compassion for what these children and what you just heard on this panel already. It is time for us to stand up, organize, call, write. Do not stop. Do not let up. And let them know that we will not be erased, that this is our home too, and that we will fight back. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative Neil Rafferty, and thank you for the work that you led so graciously with power to advocate. You're that co-conspirator and that elected official that has represented us. This is the third time we've seen these bills, and we just greatly appreciate you and we support you. Just an amazing, amazing leader. Let me hand it over to Matthew, who will open the floor up for Q&A. There's a process, I believe, Matthew, that you want to be able to follow, and we'll be glad to answer any questions that you might have.
Yep, I just know that in the chat as well, but if folks have any questions, just put your name and outlet and we can call on you and go from there. And thanks again to all of our speakers. Or if easier, you could just unmute yourself. Kim, are you looking for the mute button? Sorry. I think you're on mute if you're talking. We can unmute you.
Yes, hi. Sorry, I've been having audio problems.
No worries.
Thank you so much for doing this. I think I've spoken with many of you in the last several days. One point of clarification, exactly how does the Alabama law go further than what we've seen in Arkansas and Texas? Is it the only one to put criminal penalties or such extreme criminal penalties? Can you tell me a little bit about why this is more strident and more severe than what we've seen in the other two states?
Yeah, of course. So the Arkansas bill, which passed last year, did not have criminal penalties attached. That made it unprofessional conduct to provide gender affirming care. And, you know, I'd also note that even just as recently as last year, that bill passed over the veto of the governor of Arkansas, who signed 7 other anti-LGBTQ pieces of legislation last year. So this isn't somebody who's really a hero to the LGBTQ community, right? This is not a friend of the LGBTQ community. But the reason he gave for his veto was that he met with transgender youth who were currently experiencing or currently receiving gender affirming care. And that on the basis of his conversation with them, he came to realize how harmful it would be for their care to go away. And so he vetoed that bill, knowing even so that the veto would be overridden, which it was within a matter of hours. But yes, that bill did have criminal penalties attached. Right. What happened in Texas is a little bit different because that was actually not a law. Similarly, there was a legislator there who had a piece of legislation that was really radical. He's an extremely far-right radical legislator in Texas, and his bill was not successful. Texas did ultimately end up passing an anti-transgender sports bill last year. It took them the regular session and 3 special sessions to get that passed. And even in Texas, this legislation was considered just really radical and was not advanced through the legislative process. And as a result, the legislator was very frustrated to have had his bill not move. And so then asked the Attorney General to opine as to whether or not existing laws prohibiting child abuse in Texas include the provision of gender affirming care. The Attorney General issued, frankly, an astonishing opinion that is contrary to both basic legal principle and medicine, and said that, yes, in fact, he did find that providing gender affirming care, which is, of course, age appropriate, medically necessary, best practice care, was child abuse, which is completely and totally out of left field. There is no precedent for it whatsoever. This was absolutely a political decision with footnotes on it and masquerading as a legal opinion, which it absolutely was not. The governor then adopted that and directed the Department of Family Services to investigate families who were known to be supporting their transgender youth with gender affirming care, to investigate those families as if they had been committing child abuse. There was actually an article published just yesterday that said that there have been a tremendous number of social workers from the Department of Family Services who've resigned rather than having to comply with this because they know from their ethical and professional treatment or responsibility, they're refusing to treat gender affirming care as if it is child abuse when it is just so very patently not. That was an executive action. It was not legislation. And I think that that distinction is really important because while the enforcement, of course, is sort of within this criminal world because child abuse is a crime, it also was so completely lawless. It was completely extraordinary to the legislative process, not even the Texas legislature, which of course folks will remember passed SB 8 this year. So this is an extremely radical state legislature. Not even the Texas state legislature thought that this was a good idea and could get it done. And so this had to be a completely extraordinary process to be able to make this happen, which is why it was so quickly challenged in Texas court and has been enjoined. So I do think that it's really significant that this is a legislative choice. This is something that both chambers of the Alabama legislature have signed their names to, and that the governor is on the precipice of signing her name to. And that is a major distinction. This is a real law that is putting felony penalties, and we're talking 1 to 10 years of imprisonment attached to providing medically necessary, best practice, age appropriate care. It is so beyond the pale in terms of how outrageous it is. And as I said in my remarks, I also think it's important to keep that in mind, that this was one of 4 things that happened yesterday in 2 bills, none of which are addressing real problems. So, this is, I think, the shining star of outrageousness of what happened yesterday is the medical care ban. And that was only one of 4 things they did, all of which are outrageous, all of which are based in discrimination, none of which are addressing real problems. And I'll just, if you'll indulge me 1 second longer, to say that there was legislation that was challenging the Idaho sports ban that was passed in 2020. And one of the things that the judge made a point of mentioning in his decision in joining that case was looking at other legislation that had also been passed that same session and saying, this legislature has shown anti-transgender animus. So you can put forward arguments that you think are going to justify this that sound reasonable, but it is clear that you came to this issue with your mind made up. What you wanted to do was hurt trans people, and that's what you did. And I'm not interested in these other justifications. I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but that's the gist, right? So thank you for that question.
Kim, you want to go ahead with your second one?
I apologize. I don't mean to hog everyone's time. The lawmaker who sponsored the House version of this bill, Wes Allen, told reporters last night, we had asked him if he had met with opponents. He had said he met with doctors, but he hadn't met one-on-one with any trans teens that would be affected by this. Have any families been able to get a meeting with the governor's office? I know some did a video, I think. And is that something that you would like or asking to see happen?
I did ask, and yes, we would like it. And I was told, not at this time. Should Governor Ivey reconsider, we would be elated to meet with her to give real faces to the real people, ordinary people and ordinary kids. And, here I am, the physician who would be criminalized for doing my job and practicing the same standard of care medicine we've practiced for ages and ages, endorsed by the American Academy, not American College, American Academy of Pediatrics, as well as every other major medical association. And I've also offered her the opportunity to ask me anything. But hopefully she'll change her mind. We're right here.
And as a parent, I will say last year I reached out to anything I could, trying to get an audience last year with Governor Ivey. And Harley and I will get in the car and drive down tonight if she would wanted to talk to us. So absolutely, as a parent, I can say that if I'm given the opportunity, we definitely would take it.
And I think it's to serve some more context around invitation. When both the Senate version and the House version of the anti-trans medical ban was in the House Judiciary Committee, they verbally requested some additional information to better understand the conversation, because they felt that the bill should have probably been in the Health Committee. They asked for some medical information that Dr. Ladinsky and her team produced. They asked for statistics around bullying and as well as suicide rates that we were able to provide through HRC in partnership with the Trevor Project. And they acknowledged they received it and told us they had any questions. We had lobbyists checking in with them just to make sure that they make the best decision based now on the information that they requested. and it turned to deaf ear, and they still voted party line. So
Yeah,
I
we
wanted
had
to
many-
share that we had many meetings with these individuals. And again, they're voting party line. It's an election of season, and this is for political score. And, you know, it's just disappointing and disheartening because we work sun up, sundown. We practically live at the State House with these anti-LGBTQ plus, not to mention the work that Representative Neil Rafferty and his colleagues are doing behind the scenes and the information that they were sharing and receiving. This was definitely a slap in the face, and it was very much coordinated to directly hurt the LGBTQ plus, particularly the gender expansive youth.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Hi, I have a question. Sorry, my camera isn't working. Erin Davis from WSFA. We heard from Mr. Walker about his daughter, and I was just wondering if there was any other messages or anything that you all have heard from transgender youth, that messages they've shared with y'all about the passing of this legislation.
Oh, hey, Erin, thanks for that. It's Morissa. Dr. Ladinsky, I spoke with a number of youth standing together yesterday with one of their high school counselors, one of their teachers. One of the youth in the background was literally, their entire body was just shaking. And the question they had was, what happens next? What does this mean? We don't understand the process. So any communication that we can help give for teachers statewide, counselors statewide, and especially our gender diverse youth statewide, which right now is, this bill is not yet a law. If it is, there's a 30-day window, and we will intervene because, as I told these kids yesterday, the Constitution has built-in checks and balances to keep horrible laws from sustaining and enduring. So they need to stay strong. There were a lot of tears, and not just the youth, the parents, a lot of fear. We're hoping, a lot of hope, given a few days passage. I reached out to my colleagues at our emergency department here at Children's of Alabama, UAB, the largest pediatric emergency department in the state. And they had already received the information and are on very high alert, are working with staff and working with physicians throughout their place, throughout the state. We're hoping that what happened in Arkansas the week after passage of their law with a state overriding an inordinately conservative but solid governor, we're hoping it doesn't happen here. And my colleagues there saw 5 youth try to harm themselves very severely. So we're praying each day. Our hearts are turning over and our stomachs are full of butterflies. But we need everyone to know, be strong. We're here. We've got you. And right now, nothing changes. So, so that's what I know. It's what I've heard.
So I know that, and I'm not going to speak for Representative Rafferty, we are on the same sleep schedule, which is none. Our phones have been hotlines for our families, for these youth, particularly since I am a woman of trans experience leading HRC. These families and youth are finding much comfort in speaking to me. I have formed the title being their TT. It has been very difficult because they're going now through phases. They were exhausted being beat up by these lawmakers. Now they're questioning what's next on, my parents will not move, but I'm going to have to run away. Those type of conversations. There's been conversations. I was talking to a youth late last night. They were very emotional because they can't see past tomorrow. And they don't comprehend litigation because of their age. And so I'm more or less concerned about their well-being and not doing any self-harm. But we want to make sure that they are aware that everyone on this call in the Human Rights Campaign and their good OTT, who's the state director, our phones are 24 hours available to assist them, to guide them. I personally will travel to wherever I need to go in order to sit down with these parents and hug on these youth. I also want to mention that Prism United in Mobile and Magic City Acceptance Center in Birmingham as well, their doors are open. They are receiving a lot of calls since their work do focus on our LGBTQ plus youth. And so there are resources that they have as well that when these parents or youth need to get connected outside of HRC and these individuals on the call or UAB, those are some support groups that they can also reach out to.
Aaron, I just wanted to affirm the parents that I spoke with last night. Their instant gut instinct is looking for places to live outside of Alabama. And so I do think Governor Ivey needs to keep in mind that we could have a significant economic impact as well, because these are parents with resources who are employed and all of these things, and they contribute to Alabama society. And there are parents who are willing to move to get the gender affirming care that their children need. So I think that is important to realize as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
So let me just, for point of privilege, let me just call this out. This is the election season. These bills showed up for political score, okay? Governor Ivey wants to be governor again. She has an opponent that is attacking her conservatorship, and he is using videos and messaging to target trans individuals. And she needs to promote her position on this. We are asking Governor Ivey to veto and to show her governorship, her passion, and her empathy that all youth in Alabama deserve to thrive, to live, and to be treated equally. We have to call that out because it's nothing but for political score. And truly, a true leader that will get voted for our next governor in the gubernatorial race will be the governor who understands the makeup of Alabama, the Southern hospitality state, and will produce fair leadership and make fair decisions. And we want to make sure that Governor Ivey, that we're watching you because we too are we vote. But please try not to keep up with your opponents. Do the right thing. The children that you will be jeopardizing and impacting is our future of Alabama. And without them, we will continue to be the deep Southern state that will be ignored, and we will remain poor because of the decisions that we continue to make.